What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Now we're going to get into our SwiftData section, or data, however you say it. And if you guys go to your project directory, you should see some stuff here. You should probably have item, assuming that you checked on SwiftData. This is what comes with us by default. And it's not that much like compared to core data, which is what SwiftData is here to replace, because core data had a whole bunch of stuff like boilerplate code that you had to bring in order to use it. But for SwiftData, you can use something like this if you're gonna have multiple models, or if you have just one model, you can do model container for, and then you would just call your model here. But I'm getting ahead of myself. But yeah, SwiftData is Apple's new persistent framework, which is here to replace core data and make our lives a lot easier when we're trying to persist data on the user's device. Another thing to note about SwiftData is it's only available for iOS 17 and above. So if you're developing for something below it, then you won't have access to it. But who cares about people below iOS 17? No, but you know, sometimes if you're building something new, then it's fine. And eventually, like within a year, Apple might add support to the previous versions of iOS, like 16 or 15. But also, a lot of the users, they usually migrate within a year or two to the new iOS. Or within a year, you have more than 50% of the users on the new OS system, generally speaking. But all right, let's get into it. So what are we going to be persisting in our project? So we're going to be creating a macro model. I'm just going to call it macro. And that's what we're going to use to store the stuff that we get from ChatGPT. We're going to get the macros information, the fats, the carbs, the proteins. We're going to get the food item, and we're going to store that in SwiftData. So let's go here, let's go to item. And this is basically how you want to structure any model that you're going to be creating in your apps. So new file, Swift file, and we're going to call ours macro. You could say macro item or just macro. Cool. And you could do a little something like this. This button right here gives you this view, and you can go to item. And this is what I use if I want to reference something while I'm coding. And we will call this macro. And you need to make sure at top you declare it at model. But we'll also need to import SwiftData. Cool. Now this is where you think about what you want to do. And we're getting this error because we haven't created the initializer, as you see here. Before you create your model, you should really think about what you want inside of it. And I'm going to close this because once you have it out there, it's going to be very difficult. Not very difficult, but it's when you make changes, you're either going to have to delete the app, or you're going to have to do a migration, basically. And that's a little bit more complex. Not too much, but it'll just add another layer of complexity to the app you're building. So before you get it out to actual users, you want to be very sure of what you want in your SwiftData models. And in our case, what do we want? So we want to say let, and this is going to be a food item. And the food item is going to be a string. And then we're going to say what else? So then we could just say fats, which is an int, carbs, which is an int. And the last thing is protein, which is an int. And am I following the same order? Have I been following the order? Carbs, fats, proteins. So let's keep it in that order. So carbs, fats, and then proteins. I think that's alphabetical, right? Hopefully. And these will be the 4 main things. And I want to add 2 things as well. I want to add a created at, date, and I also just want to add a date. And this will be the date of the meal, and this will be the date that it was created. This gives us some extra information in case we're going to need that. We will need the date, so that's why I'm bringing that in for sure. But the created at lets you know when it was created, because in our app, something we're going to add the ability to track a macro you had in the past, just so users can backlog their data. I feel like that gives them some nice UX. Maybe they'll like it, maybe you won't like it, maybe you won't. And that's all I'm going to bring in for our project. And all you have to do once you have your property set up is you just need to call init and thank you autocomplete. This shows up and you can just hit enter. And boom, that is sweet. You don't have to really worry about anything unless you have some customization you're going to add to your macro. But in our case, we're not doing that. So we'll close this and we could delete this item. It's not really doing anything. And I believe we'll get an error because it's being referenced here. And we can just replace item with macro. And you want to make sure you do this, because if you don't do this and you do everything else, then, and like let's say you kept item here and you didn't delete item, then you would run your app and you would try to add a macro and it wouldn't be working. It's because it's not being declared in the scheme or schema. I think it's schema, right? Or is it scheme? Is it one of those words where it's like pronounced two ways? Let me know in the comments. But all right. So we created our model. Now we need to figure out what the hell we're going to do. So let's pull up our preview. For our preview, our preview loads up. All right, so we have our preview and we're going to have to make a few changes to this. The first thing I want to change is I want to go to our service that's talking to OpenAI or ChatGPT. And basically, I just hit command and clicked on this, by the way, if you're curious. And it said I can open it up. What does this say? Oh, no. You can just hit this and it'll take you to the file. And what I'm going to want our service to do is I'm going to want it to return the macro. And you could have it return the actual, you could have this return the model itself. You don't want your service doing that. You just want it fetching the JSON, talking to the API, blah, 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 and sending it back the whatever response or result it gives. So that's what we are going to make it do. So we're going to call this macro result. And what we'll do with this result is I'm going to create a function here underneath. This function is going to, we can call this a private func. This is gonna, we'll call this, what should we call this? Save macro. Cool. And this is gonna take in a result, which will be of type macro response. And you might want to change this to macro result. Let's do that actually. Let's refactor. Boom, super easy. All right, so we have that and we call this function here. Pretty good to go. Now we're gonna incorporate our saving. And before we do that, we need to do one thing is when you want to use SwiftData, or basically when you want to save something, you are gonna have to reference the model context. And the way you access that, you call this, you call var model context, and basically boom, now you have the model context, and this is what you use to actually save or delete items into SwiftData. So we'll copy this, just the model context, and we won't use it because first we have to create a macro. So if we call macro, we get this, and we can create this. So we can use our result.food, our created at, let's use now for both of these. Our implementation is going to change, but I'm going to use now for both of them. Our carbs is we're going to reference our result and carbs, result, and fats. And then in this one, results and protein. So we created our macro and we have the model. And now we need to reference the model context. And we need to say insert, and then we need to just insert the model that we want. And this will enter it into our persistence core data. I mean, this will enter it into our, this will save it in SwiftData and on the device. I'm not going to test it in the simulator yet because I want to fetch the data as well. So to do that in SwiftData, you need to use @query var. What are we going to call these? We'll call these macros. And you just signify the type will be of type this, and we'll get an error. And that's because now we need to import SwiftData. So you don't have to do this if you're just going to be saving and deleting, I believe, because you won't have the @query. But if you are going to be reading, then you will need this. So now that we have our macros, we can, let's see if we print it right after it saves, what is it gonna do? And one thing interesting to note is if you ever print just macros, it's just gonna say it's a macro object. So you can say first, and we'll say food. So this should be working, right? We called this function here. All right, we should be good to go to try this. So I'm gonna do this actually on the simulator. And that's because you will actually have the data be saved there if you do it on the simulator. Because otherwise on the preview, it might give you some issues or it might crash. So I'm running it on the simulator. Oh, I forgot. This should be show text field equal to true. Now we run it. Looks like I had that part missing. All right, so please enter the meal or food item you want to track. I'm going to Colombia in a little bit, so we're gonna do an empanada. Oh my God, this is refreshing every time I type empanada. And let's do chicken, just to be a little bit more specific. Done. Oh, look at that. It's saved. And how do we know it's saved? Because if you look here, this is interesting. It's printing an array of macros. But it's saved though. And the way you can tell or can know is we printed macros and it's showing up here at the bottom, what we just entered. And macros is accessing data that's being stored in our SwiftData. And not just any data, but macro information that's being stored. And this pops up here. So that means this is working. And it means our SwiftData is working, to be honest. Like our integration is working thus far. We're able to read data and write it. Now I want to change our implementation of the add button, to be honest. I don't like this, and also we have a little issue, right? Because when we get done, this should, but this is not gonna matter because we're gonna change the implementation. So we're not gonna fix the bug because we're about to annihilate it. because we're gonna annihilate it because we're gonna change up our implementation. So we go to SwiftUI, and we're basically gonna create a new view, and I'm gonna just present a little sheet to add a macro. So let's call this add macro view, and let's create a folder for our models actually, because this is getting a little out of control. Cool. All right, so in our view, and we can open up the canvas, hide the simulator, hide this. All right, so basically gonna want a VStack, and oh my God, Xcode, why do you do that? The first thing we want is just say text, and we can say add macro. Make this large title. Boom, and then underneath that, what should we have? Underneath that, we'll have the text field. This would be, just say, what did you eat? And this would be a @state. We can say private var food. And that's what we're gonna bind to the text field. We'll say food. Well, let me load up the preview so we can actually see this. And now we gotta make this look nice. So we're gonna add a background here. Do rounded rectangle corner radius of do like 15. Fill, what should we fill it with? Actually don't fill it, just stroke it. Because that's inappropriate. All right, frame max width dot infinity. Although I believe the frame was already max width, right? Yeah, it was already giving us the max width. We don't have to worry about that. That's only for the button. Then we could actually we don't need any padding because we can add padding to the whole vertical stack. We can just do padding dot vertical right here. Oh, I meant horizontal. I got my axes messed up. All right, so after the text field, I actually want a date picker. Date. And the selection is, this will be binding because, actually, will this be binding? Let's just keep it state for now. And we might have to change this to binding. Date. Actually, I don't even think we will have to change this to binding. So the date is date. Today's date. That'll be the default date. All right, refresh the preview. This looks good. Maybe we could add some spacing to this. Spacing of 20. That's pretty good. I can live with that. And then let's do a button with an action and then a label. I wrote it like this because I don't like the new Swift autocomplete. All right, and this will be done. Let's bold it. I feel like I like bold on a text. And let's add a background. At least actually just copy this. And instead of stroke, we can this will be dot fill. And let's fill it with actually color UI color dot label. And we'll have to add some padding, and we'll have to add the max width of infinity and a foreground color. Let's do the foreground color. Actually, we can do it right before the background. That makes more sense. And I believe we need foreground style of white. No. System background. I believe we can use background style here. If I can spell background. Background style. Hit Command B. No background style then. Just a background. And this creates our add macro view. And I want to present this. Instead of the alert, I want to present the macro. So let's do that under here. We're going to create a sheet. Is presented, and we're going to bind it to show text field. And to change this formatting, you can just get rid of these parentheses and this comma. Add a parentheses there, and there we go. Now we can say add macro view. And I'm going to comment this out. Hit refresh. And let me zoom in on this. All right. If I hit this, there we go. To make this look nice, we can say presentation dense And we can do a fraction of 0.4. I think that looks nice. Yeah, look at that. Pretty nice. I think 0.3 is too small, right? Yeah. 0.35. Ooh, 0.35. 0.36. I'll just do 0.4 just to give it some spacing. So we can actually remove the alert. Well, before we do that, we might want to... Actually, no, let's get rid of it. Screw it.